Hello, everybody, and welcome to Command Point. I'm Shane, and today, as you already know because you clicked on the video, I'm going to be doing a Chaos Demons faction deep dive. And I know that this is a massively highly requested video. Demons, one of the most popular teams. They basically get played at every tournament. Like top three is always Demons. They're the staple of the meta, really. And no, but seriously, I mean, I think personally, talking about Demons, I think for a team that doesn't have bespoke, they are probably one of the least represented in all of Kill Team. I feel like even Kroot gets more love from the community. Like I feel like I see Kroot at tournaments more often than I see Demons, so that's a little bit weird to me. But I've grown to get used to it. So that being said, I think that relatively speaking, I think that they're kind of a major sleeper in the meta. And I know that term gets thrown around a lot. And it is true that I do believe eventually they're going to get a bespoke team. And when they do, I will make a new video or update this video. But I do think when they do get a bespoke team, it's probably going to be something more like a kind of like a update to the compendium team. And what I'm basically saying is I think it'll be a White Dwarf team. Probably not like a box team. I can't imagine that happening personally. I mean, I would be happy if it was a box team, but I almost kind of would rather it was a White Dwarf because I want to be able to use all these demon models that I have. It's one of the few teams where I just have like all the options for it. They were my first team. Like I said, I played them a lot last edition. And I messed around with a lot of teams, and I've kind of been coming back around to Demons and playing them a little bit more. And, I just kind of want to talk about them and put out a thorough guide for the faction because there's not really anything out there talking about Demons super in depth, except for the Bjornid video, which was him having me on and talking about Demons. So I'm kind of the only person that talks about Demons. And most people watching this probably don't even play Demons, and that's a bummer because they're really cool and they're really fun, and you should play them. You should try them out sometime. So I guess I'll just start. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to talk about each of the fire teams, do a breakdown. I'm not going to go over like the stat lines and stuff. If you want to know exactly what their stats are, you can pull out your compendium or look it up on the internet or something. It's all out there. So we're going to start with Pink Horrors because I think they're super important. Pink Horrors, you can see my poorly painted Pink Horror. They are basically your main shooting model. Their shooting is not to be underestimated, and it is kind of underrated because nobody seems to talk about it. Whenever you do take pinks, you're going to end up running them with Trinket of Flux, which is the equipment piece that gives their shooting +1 damage on both normal and crit damage. So it turns their shooting from 3-4, like a bolter, to 4-5, which is really good. And they already hit on 3s with 4 shots. So pretty good shooting right there, just high damage. No AP or anything, but still. And they have a strategic play called Glistening Barrage that you can use just about every turn. And you're going to want to use it pretty often if you're running pinks, where you get ceaseless. So 4 shots on 3s, rerolling 1s, damage 4-5. That's amazing. That's so good. And you get 6 of them in a fire team. And and as far as the Trinket of Flux goes, the equipment points are 2, which means you can only put them, you can only take 5 of them max. What you're usually going to do with these is put them on on all your pinks except for the Horn Bearer, because he usually wants to spend his APL doing the horn. Granted, you can still shoot with the Horn Bearer. That's totally fine. But I think it's honestly, Trinket of Flux is probably the best equipment piece on the whole faction. So again, if you're taking pinks, you're basically always taking trinkets. There's really nothing available to Chaos Demons in the equipment department that is better and more valuable, especially for the cost. So and then one last thing about Demons is never use Split. It's terrible. Whether it's 2 CP or it's 1 CP, it's terrible. Well, I'll talk about Split more later. Just don't use it. Next up, we're going to talk about Bloodletters. That's this fella right here. If I can get him, very contrasty there. Bloodletters are kind of your standard melee threat on the team. They're really good melee threats too. They have 9 wounds, which is a decently durable chassis, considering you get 6 of them. All of your demons, by the way, are going to have a 5-up invuln. That goes without saying. And considering you get 6 of them, the melee output that they put out with damage 4/6, lethal 5, on top of the 9 wounds and the 5-up feel no pain, they are a solid body. If you were only getting 4 or 5, I wouldn't be so impressed. But 6, you're getting a lot. They're fantastic. So if you aren't taking pinks and you're up against a team with good armor, like a 3-up save, for instance, you will very likely end up taking 2 or 3 Scorched Skulls, which is a 3-point equipment piece that basically gives them a infinite range shooting attack. A lot of people think it's 6-inch range, but it's not. It's like a normal gun. It's 4 shots on 4s, AP 1, damage 4/5. So not the most reliable. In a vacuum, it's not really a great profile, but it does provide shooting and AP, which is something that if you're not taking pinks, you're straight up not going to have. Even if you do take pinks, you're not going to have any other armor piercing on the entire faction. So they do offer something that is kind of needed for the team. Again, it's a very unreliable weapon, but if you have a few models with them, it only needs to spike once on the dice to do some serious damage. 4/5 with AP 1 is nothing to scoff at. I mean, I've seen Scorched Skulls do pretty crazy chunk damage to custodians. So I think that says quite a bit about their reliability. Not their reliability, but the potential for what they can do and why you take them. On top of that, if you need to kill something with 10 wounds or more in melee, which is a chassis that you're going to run into pretty frequently in Kill Team, Bloodletters get that job done really well. Lethal 5, damage 6/4. They basically all have power weapons. And if you pop Unstoppable Ferocity, their strategic play, you're getting 5 attacks. So that puts them into really, really strong melee territory. Once you have 5 attacks, hitting on 3s with lethal 5, it's not that much different in terms of what you're going to end up with than having Relentless, because you only need, at the end of the day, 2 or 3 hits to actually kill something. And with lethal 5, it's harder to parry a lot of the time, and the damage itself is fantastic. So yeah, Bloodletters are really good melee threats. Next, we're going to talk about Plague Bears. So here's a Plague Bear. He's nasty and gross, but I love him. And yeah, so Plague Bears are possibly the best model on the faction. I mean, it's close with Pink Horrors, in my opinion. They have that 5-up invuln that everybody else has, but they also have a 5-up Feel No Pain and 8 wounds. So on average, you need to do 12 wounds of damage to a Plague Bear to reliably kill it. And again, this is a fire team of 6 models. So 6 models, basically 12 wounds apiece. They still have really good melee at damage 4/6. This is a phenomenal model. They are kind of, in my opinion, should be... I don't want to say anything is a staple or a must-take, because I think the 3 fire teams I've talked about so far all have their place with one another. But Plague Bears are probably going to feature the most, if I had to guess. That's just how I see it. They are basically the hardest team to kill in the game if you go double Plague Bears, for instance. I don't know off the top of my head what the math is for 12. I mean, it's got to be like 145, 146 wounds of damage you need to do to table the team if you really want to, which blows the next highest out of the water, if I'm not mistaken. Their equipment options are not great, but if you're running them with Bloodletters and you aren't up against high armor, then you can skip on the Scorched Skulls and give your Plague some pistols for 1 equipment point at damage 3/5, not bad. Or you can go with the 3 equipment point Rancid Vomit, which is a flamer. It's actually deceptively kind of decent. I wrote it off for a long time because of 3 EP, but there's not many flamers in the game that actually have an extra damage on the crit. This is one of them, so don't sleep on it. It can do some work. People are going to talk about how Plague Bears are slow, but once you pop the horn, they get 5-inch movement, and their move dash is going to only end up being 1 inch slower than your Bloodletter or Pink without a horn. So they're not that slow. And after turn 1, honestly, the slow teams, it's not as much of a penalty once you're up close. So yeah. Moving on to Demonettes. I'm not going to pull out a Demonette right now because my Demonettes aren't painted. So I'm just not even going to expose you to that. If you really don't know what a Demonette looks like, go ahead and Google it. Demonettes, I used to really like these, but I've started shying away from them. Relentless is really nice, but they don't perform much better than a Bloodletter with Unstoppable Ferocity, like I mentioned earlier. And the really big thing is they only have 8 wounds, which is a really unfortunate threshold in Kill Team. It's really easy to take these models out of action. And if you are taking them, I think it's really just going to be for the free dash you get from Quicksilver Swiftness, which is only really necessary on very specific missions where high mobility is really encouraged. Most missions don't require it. So, yeah. That's about all I have to say about Demonettes. They have an interesting equipment piece, the Piercing Claw, I believe it's called. And overall, usually a bit overkill. It just makes them damage 4/6 with Relentless and Rending, which is decent. But again, it's not performing much better than a Bloodletter with Lethal 5. I don't know if it is performing better, actually, once you factor in Unstoppable Ferocity. So, yeah. And then there's the other fire team, which everybody forgets about. Blue Horrors. Just don't. Just don't take them. Seriously, please don't. You get 8 models, which sounds like it's more, but you actually end up having only 4 activations. So you leave your team with less activations, and the models themselves are pitiful. It's probably the worst fire team in the game, honestly. Looking at the whole compendium, I think it is the worst fire team that you can possibly take. Yeah, so just never, ever take them. So let's move on from the fire teams and let's talk a little bit about the play style, because this is there's a lot here that you can actually do with this team. It's not like a bespoke team where there's one list and it's like, oh, am I going to change this one model out for this one other model once in a great while? And other than that, it's the same list every game. That's not really what Demons are, amazingly. There's quite a few different ways to do it. You're swapping out whole fire teams. The way you're playing the team is wildly different depending on which fire teams you take, and I find that really interesting. So, most important thing, 12 bodies, 12 activations. This is absolutely massive. I cannot stress this enough. It's huge. It actually allows Chaos Demons to somewhat compete with some of the best teams in the game, as you're not being out-activated, you're not being dominated on board control. They can't just wait you out and do all their cool stuff while you sit around and watch. I've managed to win games against really good players who are running, Wormblade or Vetguard with Demons, and I think it was like surprising to them how well Demons could keep up on the actual, the activations and the board control, and nobody really thinks about that, I think. It's hard to have that many activations and that much killing power and not be a good team. I mean, you can look at Kroot, who has 12 or 13 activations depending on what you run, but they have basically no offensive output. They do nothing to kill their opponents. And Demons have the same amount of activations, but they have much more durable chassis. They have much killier chassis. It's not even a contest. So, yeah. I do want to talk a little bit about deployment, because I think deployment is so massive in this game. If there is visibility blocking terrain, keep your pink horrors behind it and put them in engage. That should be a no-brainer. You have enough activations to wait out your opponent, so you usually don't have to worry too much about getting shot back. Avoid blast weapon range as much as possible. Keep your models out of 2 inches of each other if you're up against a strong blast weapon. This is kind of second nature at this point to a lot of experienced players, but it's harder than I'm making it sound, for sure. And you're likely going to end up having no choice but to either leave models in dangerous spots or put a couple guys within blast range of each other, just because there's no room. If you're doing this, choose carefully. Don't put pinks in dangerous position. Put plague bearers in dangerous positions. They are way more likely to just shrug off a big blast play. You will be surprised, especially if they're in cover. So, know when you have to put models in dangerous spots, and understand that Some models are more okay with it than others. Your pinks are going to fold really quickly if you start letting them get shot at. So, yeah. You're going to have horn bears if you're taking 2 different fire teams. You're going to have 2 horn bears. Pop those early as stall moves. First of all, it's going to give all of the models on your list +1 inch of movement, +1 on their charge, and it's going to stall the other team out. Like I said, you have a lot of activations. You probably have more activations than your opponent on any given game. So if you use these horns, it's going to help you in the long run, and use them as early as possible to wait out your opponent and get those moves out of the way early on, so that way you can kind of take in a little bit more information, see how they move up the board before you start committing to anything. Against teams with 4-up saves or worse, I think pink horrors are kind of an auto take. The amount of damage and the amount of reliable offensive output you're getting from pink horrors that have trinkets and glistening barrage online is too much for most teams that don't have good armor saves. So like I said, 4-up saves or worse, which is most teams in the game, take pink horrors. They are really, really good. I can't recommend them enough. With time, it's become clear how strong shooting is in this game, and with the 12 activations, you can actively look to trade with them. If you're trading with demons, unless you're up against like Pathfinders or Vetguard, it's straight up a win for you. If you move a pink out, kill a guy, and then maybe the pink dies. Not only is their shooting better than almost anything you're going to run into, but keeping them in cover with that 5-up invuln means you can very easily end up spiking a defense roll and living when your opponent assumes you're dead. And because you have so many guys, your opponent needs to be very efficient when they're attacking you, when they're shooting you. They can't afford to whiff against demons. That's generally how it is against the horde teams. You can't really, if they're coming out and killing you and you're forced to trade with them, you can't whiff, or else immediately you're a step behind. And this is just a general philosophy that applies to, Vetguard, Pathfinders, any horde team that is looking to get shooting attacks out. Plague Bears are the chunkiest front line you can ask for. Move them onto objectives. Keep your pink horrors back. That's kind of my favorite list is Plague Bears and pink horrors as of recent. They're gonna have to really chew through those plagues if they want to get to the pinks, and plagues are not fun to have to deal with. You don't really know how much damage you're gonna do when you attack them, even if they fail their saves. So throw them up there, play aggressive with them. Keep them in cover, because being in cover of the 5-up invuln is great. Get them close, and if a strategic phase comes up and you think you're going to be able to consistently, reliably get your Plague Bearers in combat, or if you're against a melee team, for instance, use Contagion. Contagion, that's the same Contagion that Death Guard get. So not only are they, not sure how much damage they're going to do to you because you have a 5-up Feel No Pain, but they're going to be injured, so they're -1 to hit. And unlike, your average Plague Marine on Death Guard, your Plague Bearers on Demons have crazy good melee. All of them have damage 4-6. I mean, at least it's crazy good for a model like that, where they're just kind of there to, bog your opponent down and slow them down. You might spike in your offense roll, on your attack roll, and kill them, but a lot of the time you just want to kind of parry and live and bog them down and waste their time and just kind of control the board with your plagues. So So I do want to talk a little bit about some ploys, some tactical ploys. The 2 main ones I want to talk about are Warp Surge and Ephemeral Regeneration. So for starters, Warp Surge is a solid ploy if you're taking a risky shot early on in the turning point and expect a lot of return fire. To get the most value out of Warp Surge, in my opinion. So Warp Surge, for those of you that don't know, it's when you're targeted by a shooting attack before your opponent rolls attack dice, you spend a CP on Warp Surge, and you get to reroll all your defense dice with that operative for the rest of the turning point. Not just for that shooting attack, for the rest of the turning point. So to get the most value out of it, my favorite play, set up a pink horror icon, get it in cover, take a risky shot early on. The icon bearers for demons create a 4-up invuln bubble instead of a 5-up invuln bubble. So if you can get that icon pink to set up a risky shot, pop their icon, and sit in cover, your opponent can shoot back at them, but when they do, you pop Warp Surge. So you've got a cover save, you've got a 4-up invul, and you're re-rolling your fails. So it's going to be so difficult to take that model off of the board. Really tanky for an 8-wound model on a 12 operative team. It's I think that's a really good play if you can get it off. You can't always get it off because you've only got 2 APL. Sometimes you need to move and shoot, and you don't get to use the icon. But yeah. And there's Ephemeral Regeneration, which is so good. You're going to be tempted to use it 3 out of 4 turns most of the time. It's extremely strong, especially on a Plague Bear where each wound that you're giving back to them, it might be more than 1 wound, So needless to say, with all these really good ploys, with Glistening Barrage, Unstoppable Ferocity or Contagion, Warp Surge potentially, Ephemeral Regeneration all the time, this is a very CP-hungry team. You're going to be burning through your ploys pretty frequently, and you're going to find yourself low on command points. Yeah, I mean, this is just another reason why Split isn't good, to circle back on that. If it was 1 CP, it would be a really interesting kind of tech choice, like really interesting tool once in a while. I don't even think it would be overpowered, to be quite honest. But at its current cost with 2 CP, you just can't afford it. So, yeah. Plague Bears, like I said earlier, they're slow, but get that horn up, and it's not going to be a big deal. So, I do want to talk a little bit about some kind of fun plays that you can do. If you're up against a team that doesn't have much blast, not a lot of blast weapons or no blast weapons at all, setting up a gunner nest in cover with a pink icon in the middle, waving his banner around, makes it really hard. I said earlier that that 4-up invuln, if on a pink horror in cover, and if a bunch of them are shooting at you and you can't really deal with them because they're hard to kill, they're in cover, they have a 4-up, that is a really hard thing to deal with for your opponent. So set that up when you can, but only if your opponent doesn't have blast, because if you're piling a bunch of pink horrors together and they get blasted, that's probably a bunch of dead pink horrors, 4-up invuln or not. So on missions like Seize Ground, another thing I like to do with that icon specifically, because you have 12 activations, you can usually set up to have your icon move last. And with the horn up, their move dash is going to be 10 inches. So if you're on something like Seize Ground, you can wait till the very end, last activation, and move a icon 10 inches and take one of your opponent's objectives, because the icon, just like all icons, counts as 3 APL. This is something I really enjoy doing. It can be an early point swing, and the nice thing about it is if you win initiative the next turn, because this is the last activation, if you win initiative, that pink has Trinket because it's an icon, and it's probably just going to kill whatever's near it, or and then move to safety, or it can just bunker down on the objective and kill whatever's near it. And if your opponent wins initiative, you might lose the icon, but they're probably going into engage to kill it, and it's one of your 12 models. And you're just going to trade. And like I said earlier, trading is really good with Chaos Demons. Big deal. Really big moment whenever you're able to trade with this team, for the most part, against most teams. All right. And so I did say I was going to round back to this. So if you're an insane person and you are just totally hellbent on using Split, this is how I'd use it. Save one of your pinks for last activation and run them up onto an objective with an enemy model close to them, or charge in if you can. That's actually even better if you're able to charge in pass, that is, don't fight. Next turn, do not activate the pink horror. Let them kill it. They will eventually kill it if it's right there out in the open. If you split on a pink that's already activated, the blue horrors come out already activated. Conversely, if you use split on a pink horror that has not activated yet, the blue horrors are going to come out ready, and you can activate them that turn. So this throws down 4 APL right onto the board next to where that pink died, and 2 GA2 models that you can immediately shoot and charge with, or charge and fight if you really want. I wouldn't advise that. Their melee is really weak. So is their shooting, but I mean, hey. Admittedly, the blue horrors are really pitiful chassis, and you're down 2 CP, which is always going to be a bad thing, but this is the way to use split if you really want to. I think you really need to predetermine that you're going to use it. It's not something where very often you're going to see a pink horror die and you're like, I wonder if I should use split here. Usually you'll consider it for like 1/2 of a second, and then you'll be like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. That's awful. So yeah, and then never use the 1 CP version of Split on a blue horde. That's even worse than doing the 2 CP one, honestly, because you're just creating a brimstone. You're not even, I mean, at least when the blues come out, it's 2 5-wound models. So, I mean, you're at least putting more wounds on the board because the pink is 8. And it's, it's 2 models. You're not really, it's not like you're going down anything. It's not a strict downgrade, although I do think it is kind of a downgrade. But turning a blue into a brimstone is truly, truly useless in my opinion. So yeah, extremely situational. Just don't even think about it, really. I do want to talk a little bit about matchups. I want to give a pretty thorough breakdown on matchups. So, if you're against elite teams, take Bloodletters and Plague Bearers. So, typically I'm talking about teams that have 3-up saves, Marines, stuff like that, which are actually running around a little bit these days with the Marine buff and Legionnaires coming out. Just run Bloodletters and Plagues, bog them down with your Plague Bearers, and take pocket shots with your triple Scorch Skull. That's what I would recommend running for the Bloodletters. And yeah, just the shooting profile on the Scorch Skull, like I said earlier, it's just gonna whiff sometimes and do nothing. But you get 1 spike dice results where you get like 2 crits and a hit or something with that AP1, and that's serious damage. That it's gonna go a long way. So run those Scorch Skulls, take pot shots when you can, and honestly, your melee on this team is gonna be pretty tough for them to handle anyway. So yeah. If you're against shooty hordes, like the current popular meta teams like Vetguard or Pathfinders or Wormblade, take Pink Horrors and Plague Bearers. Give them tough bodies to deal with when the Plague Bearers for that front line. And whenever they try to kill the plagues, and inevitably probably fail to kill the plagues most of the time, you can just shoot back with your pinks. And these 7-wound teams with a bunch of bodies, like I'm talking the Vetguard and the Pathfinders and the Wormblade, even the Cult Agents, if you can shoot them out of cover, these are models that are gonna fold if you get to shoot them with a Pink Horror. Anytime you get to shoot a Guardsman with that Trinket of Flux pink profile, you're looking at worst a 1-for-1 trade if they kill that pink right after. And they might not, because you're more durable than them. You have more wounds than them, even if it's by 1. But it's a pretty good break point, You've got a 5-up invuln where they don't. So there's that. Their AP isn't really going to bother you that much, outside of the fact that the weapons that typically have AP are also high damage. So look out for that, I guess. But yeah, Ghost Sending Barrage should be online most of the time against these teams, because you're always looking to trade with your shooting. And if your Plague Bears get in, they're probably killing Guardsmen most of the time, knock on wood. So yeah, against the mid-sized teams though, this is where it gets a little bit more matchup dependent and fire team dependent on what you're going to take. So I'm going to go over them individually. I'm just going to hit all the teams that you're going to run into most of the time. So if you're against Commandos, I like taking pinks and either one of the other melee types. Both work perfectly fine. Orcs hate dealing with Contagion. Their melee profiles are actually kind of mediocre. 4 attacks on 3s, damage 4/5, and if they're injured, they're not going to kill a Plague Bear. It's just really unlikely. They hate dealing with that. And as far as Bloodletters go, Bloodletters pop them really easily. 6/4 or 4/6 rather. With the lethal 5, it's going to kill a Commando. I mean, they're going to use just a scratch, but every single model on your team, for the most part, is capable of killing an Orc. So I think that the Demons play pretty well into that team. So yeah. Against Novitiates with their 3-up saves, I do think you want to leave the Pink Horrors at home and go with a melee heavy build, kind of the way that you would approach an elite team. I said earlier, Bloodletters and Plagues. Take Scorch Skulls. It doesn't need to really spike that much because they don't have a lot of wounds. If you just get like 3 hits off, you might kill one. And Novitiates aren't fantastic in melee outside of a couple models. So just run that team. Go melee heavy. Utilize those Scorch Skulls. Take pot shots when you can. And I think you're going to be pretty much fine. Against Corsairs, which is the newest team of this archetype. I think you run Pink Horrors and Plague Bearers. They just cannot afford to leave a model out for your pinks to shoot at all, because they only have, first of all, they only have 9 models, but they're folding about as easily against your shooting as a lot of the shooty hordes up there. So this is, in my opinion, a really easy matchup for Demons. They just can't trade with you ever. It's terrible for Corsairs to be trading with Demons. And what makes that nice is that all of your models can kill them. So I would go Corsairs and Plague Bearers. You can run Bloodletters, but I would go Plague Bearers personally. Just another hurdle for them to deal with, and your plagues kill them just fine. They're going to struggle to kill that chassis, and they do not want to. They don't want to trade with you. So really easy matchup, I think. Against Hunterclade, I think you go Pinks and Bloodletters. This is not one where I would typically go Plague Bearers. Bloodletters are going to tear through those Sicarians, and I've found that against Hunterclade, if you can get rid of the Sicarians early on in the first couple turns, the team really loses a lot of its bite. So Bloodletters with that lethal 5, 4, 6, the power weapons, they are going to get into combat with those infiltrators as soon as they can, pop Unstoppable, Ferocity in the strategic phase, and just kill them. And that's typically how that's going to go. And then honestly, I think that your Pink Horrors, they don't mind shootouts with this team. They trade into them pretty well. The Trinket shooting profile is going to more often than not cause a lot of problems for the Rangers and Vanguard, but also the Sicarians too. Honestly, unless it's a Ruststalker in cover, I wouldn't stress it too much. So yeah, and you out-activate them, so that's great. And then I do want to talk about Warp Coven, which I think is a really difficult matchup for Demons. I think out of all of the teams in the game, honestly, maybe at least of the mid-sized teams like this, I think this is probably your hardest matchup. Your pink shooting isn't really great against the Sorcerers, although it's good against the Goats. And they have a lot of blast and indirect from those psychic powers, whether it's Flux Blast or Firestorm. That's going to trade really well into you, especially if they're doing Infernal Fire along with it. So, and the, I forget what it's called, Ephemeral Instability, the slow that everybody hates. That's really going to gimp your Plague Bearers, so I would not recommend taking Plague Bearers, even if they'd otherwise be okay in the matchup. I just don't think you can afford to have models that are that immobile on your list. Because of this, I would recommend going Bloodletters with Scorch Skulls, and you can go Pinks or Plagues. I don't think either are amazing. Probably Pinks, but I don't know. I mean, I think ideally the best thing you can take against this team is 12 Bloodletters, but I don't think you're going to have 2 of either fire team on the roster. Personally, I think you just need all 3, as you can kind of tell. I think you just use the Plagues in this matchup rather than frontline. It's just back objective holders that don't have to move up the board much. Just take pot shots at those Sorcerers and the Rubrics with your Scorch Skulls when you can, and just keep your models out of 2 inches of each other at all costs, because that will just lose you the matchup as soon as they're able to shoot you with that Flux Blast and hit 3 to 4 guys. I think it's the hardest matchup, but it's not impossible. I've played it and won it before, but I would hate to run into it at a tournament if I'm playing Demons. So yeah, there's that. And then there's Harlequins, which is like the flavor of the month right now, and everybody's really scared of them. I would run Plague Bearers for sure. Contagion can give the clowns a hard time once in a while, especially if they're not taking the blades to get that free reroll. Hitting on 4s is just dicey. Even if you have 5 attacks, it's not fun. Despite Domino Field hurting shooting, I still think Pink Horrors are a decent take here. You just have to play more aggressively, move within 6 inches. If a pink shoots any player, any clown on that team, the clown will probably die. I mean, they have a 4-up invuln, so you never really know for sure, but I like it. It's a tricky matchup, though. I think it's another one where you'll have to keep everybody out of 2 inches, just because they're going to have a lot of grenades. They're going to have that the Death Jester with that Torrent ability that's pretty scary. Luckily, though, the Death Jester is their only long-range threat. So, you know, if you have to keep guys maybe not in cover to avoid getting blasted, that's not the end of the world against this team the way it would be against something like Vet Guard or Pathfinders. So yeah, and I think this pretty much covers most matchups pretty well. If there's any that I didn't talk about that you guys really want to hear, put it in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. But I think that's the main things you're going to have to worry about at a tournament. Overall, I mean, I'm going to start wrapping this up. I think Chaos Demons are absolutely slept on. Probably one of the best in the Compendium, if not the best. I think they're up there with Compendium Guard that a lot of people really like. I think you're going to see other tier lists where people are going to put demons in like D tier. And it's very obvious to me that the only reason they're doing that is because they probably don't ever run into demons. They don't know anybody that plays demons. They just see, oh, it's a Compendium team. Nobody plays it. They're probably bad. And that's fair. I mean, it's you know, if you're not running into something, you're never seeing it. It's hard to know just how strong it is. But I think they're pretty good. They're my favorite faction in Kill Team. You know, they're a bit lacking in terms of crazy individual models like the Box and White Dwarf factions, but I'm sure that's going to change in the near future. I don't expect them to be in a box, but White Dwarf, give me some, you know, Heralds with some Psychers on this team, and I would love that personally. Yeah, I mean, otherwise I'd like them to keep the models that are in the team right now the same, just because I have them and I can, you know, I can just run what I have rather than having to buy another box team, which I've done now twice, and it's expensive. You know, I like my models. I don't really want more. So yeah, honestly, if the team interests you at all, give them a spin. They're seriously underrated, and one of the few factions I think that nobody's talking about that can give these meta teams a run for their money. Plus, nobody plays them, so you'll seem cool and interesting at the game store, and nobody's going to judge you at the end of the day for playing Chaos Demons, even if they are secretly pretty good. So, you know, you're not going to get those silent judgments. But seriously, though, thank you guys for listening. I hope that this was informative. I hope enough people watch this and think, oh, hey, maybe this is actually a cool team. Maybe I should be the only person at my store playing them. Yeah, as always, shout out to everybody that's subscribed to us. You guys are very cool. And if you're not subscribed and enjoying our content, please subscribe. It helps us a lot. And as always, again, huge shout out to all of our patrons who are just going to be scrolling down the screen any moment now. You guys keep us kicking. So this is Shane from Command Point talking about demons, signing out.